Oh, no.
I do. I'm still in last year. Lambert's back. Arena run.
No, that's what I'm saying, yeah. Oh, it's right, yeah. Well, that's my name right here. We okay? Somebody's got to fill out the middle.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 26th, 2022 BCAG board meeting. If you could stand with me and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Call the roll. Thank you. Board Member Connolly?
Here.
Board Member Lucero? Here. Board Member Ritter? Here. Board Member Kimmelshoe? Board Member Teeter?
Here.
Board Member Knuckles?
Here.
Board Member Kay Reynolds? Board Member Calderon?
Here.
Board Member C. Reynolds? Board Member Jones? Here. The first item we have is the consent agenda. Does anyone wish to remove anything from consent? Have any public comments on a motion? Approve. All in favor?
Aye.
No? Moving on to item 8, approval of the 22-23 unmet transit needs assessment and findings. Victoria?
Good morning, Board. BCAG is required to prepare an annual unmet transit needs assessment as administrator of the Transportation Development Act funds for Butte County. And each year, BCAG must identify and publish unmet transit needs that may exist in Butte County in order to receive state funding. If unmet transit needs are found, a further determination must be made as to whether those findings are reasonable to meet or unreasonable to meet. All unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet must be satisfied before TDA funds can be expended for non-transit uses, such as streets and roads. Testimony was collected during a 30-day outreach period in February and March 2022, where the public was invited to provide input in person and via mail, email, phone, and social media, as well as an online comment board on the Beeline website. This outreach period culminated with a public hearing before the BCAG Board of Directors at the March 2020 meeting, or 2022 meeting. And this 30-day comment period, along with the final public hearing, was promoted in local newspapers, on all transit buses, and on the internet at both the BCAG and Beeline websites and on social media pages. In addition, the notice was emailed to community service, social service agencies. After comments were received, they were compiled into an analysis report, which was linked on the Beeline website. as the draft unmet transit needs assessment for 22-23. The assessment examines transit-dependent groups, adequacy of existing transit services, and a detailed summary of the public testimony that was received, and staff's analysis of whether the testimony meets the definition of unmet transit needs, and whether or not those needs are reasonable to meet. The assessment has been reviewed by our Social Services Transportation Advisory Council, SSTAC, which met at the May 2nd, 2022 SSTAC meeting to review it. Based on the testimony and the analysis used as the adopted definitions of unmet transit needs and reasonable to meet, the BCAG Board of Directors is required to make one of three findings. There are no unmet transit needs, there are no unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet, or there are unmet transit needs, including those that are reasonable to meet. Based off the testimony that we received in our conversation with the SSTAC, we would request that the board adopt the finding that there are no current unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet.
So
Any
moved.
questions?
I was just wondering, on page 3 of the action report, it says that our population estimate was 1,340.
Mm-hmm.
Is it like 202 now?
That number came directly from Brian Lasagna, who got it directly from the Census Bureau. He gave me, but I will double check.
We'll adjust that number.
I will double check and correct that.
Any other questions?
Moved with the correction.
Was there any public comment on this item? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Item 9, approval of revisions to the regional transit advertising policy and agreement. John?
Members of the board, is item claims. BCAG currently has an agreement with Lamar Transit LLC. Background, originally we started an agreement with Stott Outdoor Advertising back in 2009. On board to maintain our shelters. As part of that initial agreement, all about the system. To recoup their investment of putting in those shelters, they provide advertising in most of the additional shelters. In addition, they provide advertising on the back of buses, so they their investment to putting the shelters in. After about, I'm going to say 5 years, I think starting in 2015, we then started. Cheryl or something?
I muted her.
Starting in 2015, we began to collect advertising revenue, which is about $50,000 a year. Back in August 2021, Lamar Transit LLC bought Stott, so they now have the contract for maintaining our shelters, which includes. We met with them in April just to kind of meet them and get acquainted. At that time, they presented us some options to do additional advertising on the sides of buses. This is pretty much done across the industry now. And in doing so, we could increase our revenues to probably upwards of $450,000 to $500,000. Good thing about that is these revenues are, don't have the restrictions or red tape that a lot of federal state funds have. So funds that we could put back into the transit system to various things, whether operations or shelters to maintain. So it would be a good source of revenue to help with the transit budget. So as outlined in staff's memo, I think Andy compiled some some graphics that show you what the site advertising would look like. Much standard in the industry right now. Stations do provide site advertisements on their buses. Also is attachment, Exhibit B, which goes through the guidelines that we have in place for any advertisement. I think we added one additional item, number 10, which is a cap on any one advertiser not to go beyond 35%. Other than that, the board's approval to move forward with making amendments to this agreement so that we could offer advertising on the site of buses, which would
Questions for John? I had a question, John. On that list of things that are prohibited to be advertised, vaping products included.
It doesn't say that explicitly. We can add that, and that would certainly be something.
And also cannabis.
I would say that before any advertisements go on the buses, those are always reviewed with staff so that we can make.
Any public comment on this?
None.
That don't have the,
That don't have THC.
Does it say in there, in the additional revenues that come in, is it specified what those additional revenues, or can it be used for anything?
Can be used for anything. And so like when we started the discussions with them about this, one of the things, and I'm not saying it would, did a shelter improvement plan. We have several shelters that don't meet ADA standards, so we've kind of struggled with how to for those shelters. I mean, this would be a funding source. And like I said, it doesn't have the federal grant or state grant and so forth. Like any use in the transit program.
Well, I like the idea of definitely upgrading our shelters. There's
Yeah.
a lot of them in need. I'm not saying we should necessarily tie that to it, but the intent, hopefully.
And actually, Lamar, we were really impressed with their staff. They're actually right now going through making some cosmetic improvements to a lot of the shelters that really weren't associated with advertisement. Not that, they are making several improvements over.
there are no further questions. Do I have a motion? With the, changes that we
With the
agreed to.
changes,
A suggestion, we vote on it. I think if, on the cannabis, if the feds legalize it,
Well, tobacco's legal. And so is alcohol, and we say we won't advertise those.
saying,
We can relook at it, but if we're not gonna advertise.
I think it's worth relooking, that's all I'm asking.
That's fine.
Jameson's isn't alcohol. Necessary.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Item number 10. Request from John to extend his employment agreement to January 31st. John?
I know it was only 5 months ago, I think I was standing at the podium saying that time to go, but, I have kind of reconsidered and, did, discuss this with, Chair Jones and Vice Chair Reynolds. There were a couple items that I would kind of like to stay on for to kind of just deal with. One would be just to work with staff for another budget cycle on the ag budget and be like, just spent a little more time with them this year, and I didn't, a lot of things going on. Also indicated back in January when I spoke to the board that the North Valley Passenger Rail project is, very exciting, and that is moving along very well. But, I would like to, when I'm in the process of trying to line up funds to do the next project development activities, such as project study reports and environmental documents, and so time working on that. I also like to work with our federal lobbyist, Christy Moore, our federal legislative platform together. Got about $102 billion in federal funds for rail as part of the new transportation bill passed, and so there's some great opportunities to get there. So I would just like to extend my contract with the board's approval.
Anybody have any questions?
I'll vote for it as long as rail comes to Orville.
Were there any public comments on this item? Motion to. All those in favor? Aye. We're all very happy that you actually want to stay another year, John. Moving on to items for information, item number 11, the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council recruitment of new members.
So the TDA requires that BCAG have a Social Services Transportation Advisory Council. The main priority of the SSTAC is to annually participate in the identification of unmet transit needs within Butte County, as discussed earlier this morning. The SSTAC meets at least one time per year to review and recommend action via the Transit Needs Assessment to the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. And council members can also advise the RTPA on any other major transit issues that may arise, as we saw last year with the need for for non-emergency medical transportation. According to the TDA guidelines, the SSTAC shall consist of representatives from several categories filling 3-year terms, with 1/3 of membership coming to an end of their term each year. There are no limits in the length of time an appointee can serve on the SSTAC, so at the end of one's term, the member can reapply and be reappointed for the additional 3-year term, and term with the fiscal year. In order to open up the membership to as broad a demographic and geographical range as possible, the staff has placed posters in all the fixed route and paratransit buses, sent out a press release to local news and radio agencies, reached out to local social services agencies, retirement centers, independent living centers, and posted on the BCAG and Beeline websites and social media pages. For this next fiscal year, 22-23 appointments, the deadline to apply is June 30th, 2022. And applications are available on our website. This item is just presented for information.
Anybody have any questions? Or any public comment?
I had a question. So is the thought moving forward that if we are aware of an agency or an organization that should be part of the SSTAC, that we just refer them to the website in order to fill out an application, or?
Refer them to me specifically if you have someone that you believe would be a benefit to the SSTAC, and I can give them the answer.
Is there any member of the public who wishes to present an item that was not on our agenda? Seeing none, we are now adjourned. Our next meeting will be June 23rd here in the BCAG boardroom at 9 o'clock.
We had one that was like 90 minutes or something like that.
Sure, it was Bill.